Welcome to our channel, where we explore the darkest corners of history. Today we're counting down the top 10 most devastating massacres in history. From ancient times to the modern era, these events have left an indelible mark on humanity. Let's get started. History is not just a collection of dates and famous names, it is the story of us, of humanity. And while we often celebrate its triumphs, its moments of genius and progress, we must also confront its shadows. It's in these darkest moments that we can truly understand the depths of human cruelty, but also the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The events we are about to discuss are profoundly disturbing. They are tales of immense suffering, of hatred, and of loss on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. They serve as a stark, chilling reminder of what can happen when ideology turns venomous, when power goes unchecked, and when we forget our shared humanity. Our journey today will take us across continents and through centuries, examining 10 events that have irrevocably scarred our collective past. This is not for shock value. The purpose of revisiting these tragedies is to remember the victims, to understand the historical forces that led to such atrocities, and to learn the vital lessons they offer. By bearing witness to the past, by refusing to look away from its most horrific chapters, we arm ourselves with the knowledge and the empathy needed to ensure that history does not repeat itself. This is a solemn undertaking, but a necessary one. We begin in the recent past, with an event that shocked the world with its speed and brutality. In 1994, the small African nation of Rwanda was plunged into an abyss of violence. Following the assassination of President Juvenal Habyarimana, a Hutu extremist elements within the Hutu majority government unleashed a meticulously planned campaign of extermination against the Tutsi minority. For 100 days, from April to July, the country became a killing field. Neighbors turned on neighbors, friends on friends, incited by hateful propaganda broadcast over the radio, urging ordinary citizens to take up machetes and murder their fellow countrymen. The scale of the killing was staggering. An estimated 800,000 people, overwhelmingly Tutsis but also moderate Hutus who opposed the genocide, were systematically slaughtered. This wasn't a distant, impersonal war fought by armies. It was intimate, brutal, and carried out face-to-face in villages, churches, and homes. The international community, tragically, was slow to react, failing to intervene effectively as the death toll mounted with terrifying speed. The Rwandan genocide stands as a harrowing reminder of the fragility of peace and the terrifying power of state-sponsored hatred to ignite the very worst of human nature. Our next chapter takes us to Asia, during the tumultuous period of the Second Sino-Japanese War. In December 1937, the Imperial Japanese Army captured Nanking, which was then the capital of the Republic of China. What followed was not merely the conquest of a city, but a 6-week period of unrestrained terror and brutality inflicted upon its inhabitants. The soldiers of the Japanese army engaged in a horrifying spree of mass murder and war crimes, an event that would forever be known as the Rape of Nanking. The violence was indiscriminate and sadistic, targeting soldiers and civilians alike. Tens of thousands of disarmed Chinese soldiers were executed in mass killings, and countless civilians were murdered in cold blood. The city's women suffered unimaginably, with widespread and systematic rape used as a weapon of war. Homes were looted and burned, reducing vast swaths of the ancient city to rubble. Historians are still debating the exact death toll, but conservative estimates place it between 150,000 and 300,000 people killed in just a few weeks. The Nanking Massacre remains a deep and painful wound in the history of Sino-Japanese relations, and a stark example of the utter breakdown of military discipline and human decency in wartime. In 1947, the British Empire relinquished its control over the Indian subcontinent, a moment that should have been one of pure celebration. Instead, the decision to partition the territory along religious lines into two independent nations, Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan, unleashed a maelstrom of violence. The drawing of the new borders, particularly the Radcliffe Line, displaced up to 15 million people, creating one of the largest and most rapid mass migrations in human history. As millions of Muslims trekked to Pakistan and millions of Hindus and Sikhs moved to India, they became vulnerable targets for extremist mobs. What followed was a period of horrific sectarian violence. Entire trainloads of refugees were ambushed and slaughtered by armed gangs from the opposing community. Villages were burned and men, women and children were massacred in orgies of retaliatory violence. The chaos was overwhelming, and the newly formed governments of India and Pakistan were ill-equipped to handle the humanitarian crisis or quell the bloodshed. The exact number of casualties is impossible to know for certain, but estimates range from a staggering 200,000 to as many as 2 million people killed. The partition remains a profound trauma, a story of freedom born in blood and fire. During the chaos and fog of the First World War, the ruling party of the Ottoman Empire, the Committee of Union and Progress, embarked on a brutal, systematic campaign to eliminate its Armenian population. The Young Turk government, fearing the Christian Armenians would side with their enemies, particularly Russia, used the war as a pretext to solve the Armenian question once and for all. What unfolded was the first genocide of the 20th century. Beginning on April 24, 1915, with the arrest and execution of hundreds of Armenian intellectuals in Constantinople, the plan was put into motion across the empire. Able-bodied Armenian men were either conscripted into the army and worked to death in labor battalions or were outright murdered. The remaining population, women, children, and the elderly, were forcibly deported from their ancestral homes in Anatolia and driven on death marches into the Syrian desert. They were deprived of food and water and subjected to robbery, rape, and murder by their guards and marauding bands. An estimated 1.5 million Armenians perished through direct killing, starvation, and disease. It was a state-organized attempt to erase a people and their culture from history, an atrocity that many nations, including Turkey, still controversially refuse to recognize as a genocide. When the Khmer Rouge, a communist movement led by the infamous Pol Pot, seized control of Cambodia in 1975, they initiated one of the most radical and deadly social experiments in history. Their goal was to create a completely self-sufficient agrarian utopia, a reset to year zero. To achieve this, they immediately emptied the cities, forcing millions of people into the countryside to work in collective farms and labor camps. The regime abolished money, private property, and religion. It targeted anyone considered an intellectual, which could mean something as simple as wearing glasses or speaking a foreign language, as well as ethnic minorities and former government officials. The result was a national nightmare. The combination of forced labor, malnutrition, and starvation led to mass death. The regime's paranoia was extreme, and anyone suspected of disloyalty was taken to notorious security prisons like Tuol Sleng, where they were tortured into giving false confessions before being executed in the infamous killing fields. In just 4 years, from 1975 to 1979, the Khmer Rouge's brutal policies led to the deaths of an estimated 1.7 to 2.2 million people. This was nearly a quarter of Cambodia's entire population, a self-inflicted holocaust that decimated a generation and left scars that the nation is still healing from today. Under the iron fist of Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union created a vast and brutal system of repression known as the Gulag. This was a sprawling network of forced labor camps that stretched across the most inhospitable regions of the country, from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the arid plains of Kazakhstan. The Gulag was not initially designed as a system of mass extermination in the same vein as Nazi death camps, but rather as a tool of political repression and economic exploitation. Millions of people, from political dissidents and so-called enemies of the people to common criminals and ethnic minorities, were sentenced to the camps. Life in the Gulag was a living hell. Prisoners were forced to perform grueling labor, such as logging, mining, and constructing massive infrastructure projects, often with primitive tools in extreme weather conditions. They were given meager food rations that amounted to a slow starvation diet and housed in overcrowded unsanitary barracks. Disease, exhaustion, and the sheer brutality of the guards resulted in an astronomical mortality rate. While the primary purpose was labor, the conditions were so deadly that the camps became instruments of mass death. It is estimated that during the height of Stalin's terror, at least 1.6 million people perished within this Gulag archipelago. At the turn of the 20th century, as European powers scrambled for control of Africa, the German Empire established a colony in what is now Namibia. Tensions between the German colonists and the indigenous Herero and Namakwa peoples escalated over land and resources, culminating in a rebellion in 1904. The German response was not merely to suppress the uprising but, shockingly, to annihilate the people. Under the command of Lieutenant General Lothar von Trotha, the German colonial troops adopted a policy of explicit extermination. After defeating the Herero warriors at the Battle of Waterberg, von Trotha issued a formal extermination order. The German soldiers systematically drove the surviving Herero, men, women and children, into the vast and unforgiving Kalahari Desert. They poisoned the waterholes and set up patrols to ensure that none could escape, effectively sealing the desert as a massive death trap. Those who weren't killed outright or driven into the desert were rounded up into concentration camps, where they died in huge numbers from disease, starvation, and overwork. The Namaqua people who later rebelled met a similar fate. By 1907, it's estimated that up to 80% of the Herero population and 50% of the Namaqua population had been killed, with death tolls ranging from 24,000 to 100,000. It is now widely considered the first genocide of the 20th century. We now travel far back in time to the 13th century to witness a series of massacres on a truly continental scale. Under the leadership of the brilliant and ruthless Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongol Empire exploded out of the steppes of Central Asia to create the largest contiguous land empire in history. Their conquests were characterized by military genius but also by a level of brutality that was honestly unprecedented. For the cities and kingdoms that dared to resist them, the Mongol policy was often one of total annihilation. The goal was to terrorize future opponents into immediate submission. Cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, Baghdad, and Kiev were razed to the ground. In many cases, the entire population was systematically slaughtered, with accounts from chroniclers of the time describing pyramids of skulls being erected as a warning to others. The destruction was so vast that it had demographic and even environmental consequences, with some modern studies suggesting the depopulation was so significant it may have cooled the global climate. While precise figures from this era are impossible to verify, modern historians estimate that the Mongol conquests may have resulted in the deaths of as many as 40 million people, a staggering percentage of the world's population at the time. In the heart of 20th century Europe, a supposedly enlightened continent, the Nazi regime, led by Adolf Hitler, orchestrated the most industrialized and systematic genocide in human history. The Holocaust, or the Shoah, was the state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million European Jews. Fueled by a virulent anti-Semitic ideology, the Nazis deemed the Jews to be an inferior race and a threat to German racial purity. The final solution to the Jewish question was a euphemism for a horrifying plan, the complete extermination of an entire people. Jews were first segregated into ghettos, then transported in horrific conditions in cattle cars to a network of concentration and extermination camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, and Sobibor. Here the machinery of death was perfected. Millions were murdered in gas chambers, while others succumbed to starvation, disease, forced labor, and brutal medical experiments. The Holocaust was not limited to Jews. The Nazis also targeted millions of others they considered undesirable, including Roma people, disabled individuals, Poles and other Slavic peoples, Soviet prisoners of war, and political and religious opponents. It stands as the ultimate example of where racial hatred and totalitarian ideology can lead. For our final and most devastating entry, we must look not at a single event confined to a few years, but at a brutal system that spanned 4 centuries and 3 continents. The transatlantic slave trade was a monstrous enterprise that forcibly ripped millions of Africans from their homes, condemning them to a life of chattel slavery in the Americas. This was a massacre in slow motion, a prolonged demographic catastrophe for Africa, and a holocaust of human suffering. The process began with violent capture in Africa, followed by horrific forced marches to coastal slave forts, where families were torn apart forever. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was itself an unparalleled horror. Africans were packed into the dark, filthy holds of slave ships in conditions so cramped they could barely move. Disease, suffocation, and malnutrition were rampant, and it's estimated that 15 to 20% of every human cargo perished during the voyage. Those who survived were sold into a life of brutal labor on plantations in the Americas. The total death toll directly attributable to the slave trade is immense. Historians estimate that between 10 to 12 million Africans died as a direct result of the trade. From their capture, through the Middle Passage, and during the first brutal years of seasoning in the New World. It was a centuries-long crime against humanity that fundamentally reshaped the world. We have journeyed through some of the most harrowing events in human history, from the killing fields of Cambodia to the gas chambers of Auschwitz, from the deserts of Namibia to the slave ships of the Atlantic. Each story is a universe of pain, a testament to the immense suffering that human beings can inflict upon one another. It is difficult, and frankly it should be difficult, to confront these realities. To look away is easier, but to remember is our solemn duty. These were not just numbers, they were millions of individual lives, each with hopes, dreams, and families, all brutally extinguished. The thread that connects these disparate tragedies is often the same: the dehumanization of a group of people. Whether based on ethnicity, religion, or political ideology, the first step towards mass atrocity is always to convince one group that another is less than human. This is the most crucial lesson we must take from this dark history. It teaches us to be vigilant against the language of hatred and division, to challenge prejudice wherever we see it, and to stand up for the rights and dignity of all people, especially the most vulnerable minorities in our societies. By remembering the victims, we honor their memory. By studying the causes, we arm ourselves with the knowledge to prevent such horrors from ever happening again. The past cannot be changed, but the future is not yet written. Let us choose to build a future based on empathy, understanding, and a resolute commitment to our shared humanity. Thank you for joining us on this difficult but important journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Stay thoughtful and stay safe.